saying that today is your father's yahrzeit, right, Sandy? Today? And it's also the 11-month, marking the 11th of Todd's father's passing and his shiva. So I just wanted to dedicate our learning this morning to both of those men and to say happy Hanukkah, but also just to acknowledge that these are sort of crazy times and saying Kaddish is a hard thing over Zoom. And so just to acknowledge that both of you are honoring your dear fathers today. Zichrona livracha. I thought I would pivot us a little bit. Maybe you saw my note in Haluach. We're going to take a little break from brachot just for this morning because I thought it would be interesting to look at some of the texts on Hanukkah. More interestingly than looking at the text on Hanukkah is to find that there's not a lot of text on Hanukkah. That is to say that there's not a lot of text in the Mishnah on Hanukkah. And there's a whole host of reasons why. Some are historical. I'm going to share my screen. Some are historical. Some are I would say, philosophical, that people have sort of done, their research to figure out what's going on, that the Mishnah didn't really capture that. And so what I actually found was this great source sheet. And to be totally honest, we're not even going to go through it. I'm just going to put it in the chat if you're interested, because it just gives a sort of like 8 or 9 different reasons as to why, I'm trying to find my chat, as to why it's not in the Mishnah. And I thought you might find it interestingly. Nothing, stuck out particularly to me. That because it had been written elsewhere, or that the sort of the timeline of it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to put it in the Mishnah, things like that. Anyway, if you have any interest in it, it's all there. We are going to study one Mishnah. It's pretty far down in our source sheet. Are you on my source sheet right now? You can all see that? Okay, I'm having 2 screens. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to cover was this: Hanukkah, Hanukkah, Hanukkah. Maybe you've seen some writing on that this year. I don't know why it's sort of become, a thing. And I just wanted to sort of give you my own take on it. There's also an article out there that explains it. Obviously, the answer is that there's no right answer, right? The word is in Hebrew, and we do our best to transliterate Hebrew. But I will just tell you that scholars these days, I had a rabbi in rabbinical school who was very, very strict on this. Like, he would red pen our papers about transliteration, because he felt that it was very important that rabbis know how to transliterate in a way that lay people could read it and be able to say it. Jews and non-Jews. That was sort of his main focus, right? Was to say he wants people to be able to read a word in transliterated Hebrew and be able to say it like the Hebrew. Now, if you were to do that with the second or third one here, you would get Chanukah, right? So I think that spelling is kind of on its way out. I don't know if you've noticed that. We at Beth Sholom do not use that spelling, and we go with the first one, which is, I think, as close to the word as you're going to get in English. Sometimes I write things with a KH, which is kind of like Hanukkah, right? That would look really strange for this particular word. Yeah, Sandy's like, no way, I can't handle that. But anyway, I just thought it was like a fun little thing to look at, because Rabbi Ain said yesterday at the concert last night, all of our sort of PR things say this first spelling here, HaunkKah, and Jeremiah used the Chau, whatever. And Rabbi Ain said, we've now used every spelling at Beth Sholom. But just to say that our goal with transliteration, I think the goal of transliteration should always be to make it sort of recognizable to somebody who doesn't actually know the word. That's the whole point, right? So anyway, side note, just thought it was fun. So we're going to start this morning in the Mishnah Torah. We basically this morning have 3 or 4 texts. We have the Mishnah, which we know we've been studying. That's the earliest of the texts that we're going to study. We have the Mishnah Torah, which was Maimonides, which was written in around 1100. And the Shulhan Araf, which is also codes, right? Sort of codifying laws that came before in the Talmud and the Mishnah. We have a commentator on that, which is called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which was in the 1800s, and then some commentators even on the Shulchan Aruch, which we're going to see. So I'll remind you of this as we go. But the main place that we find Hanukkah. The main place that we find information and text about Hanukkah is this one big section in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud, in Shabbat, in Masechet Shabbat, 21b-ish through 23. And it's essentially one long paragraph with 2 or 3 pages worth of Hanukkah information, and then it stops. And what I've done here is I've tried to break it up a little bit by topic, sort of in the who, what, when, where, why, and how categories. And so as we go through this, you can sort of think, okay, what are we answering here? Are we answering where? Are we answering how? Are we answering when? And so you'll see that even that I didn't put the Shabbat text sort of in order. I put it more in order of topic. So you'll see us jumping around a little bit. So this is our first one, the Mishnah Torah. Again, codified, a book, a series of laws. And this one happens to be about Hanukkah. So it says the mitzvah of Hanukkah, mitzvat ner Hanukkah. You can see the first 3 words of the Hanukkah lamp is exceedingly precious. And one should carefully observe it in order to acclaim the mitzvah, ever praising and thanking God for the miracles which God has performed for us. Even if one has nothing to eat, except what he gets from charity, he should borrow or sell his garment to buy oil and lamps and light them. Okay, so first of all, it kind of pivots, right? It first starts off by saying how important the holiday is. It's very precious. You should take it very seriously. And then we get kind of a jarring turn, which is to say, not only are you supposed to praise God and remember what happened, remember the miracle, right, which we'll talk about, but even so far as that, if you have nothing left, you're supposed to sort of do everything that you can to have the money to be able to have this oil for the lamps for the 8 days of Hanukkah, which, by the way, is kind of contrary to what we hear in our regular tradition, which is make sure that you take care of yourself, right? Make sure that you don't give away everything that you have in order to do this. So I'm curious, like any thoughts just based on that first opening? I mean, that's a pretty big statement, I think, right? That you're supposed to do everything that you can in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Hanukkah, which, by the way, we don't know so much about yet.
Is Maimonides, I have really not read or studied him. Is he usually literal like this? I mean, yeah, yes. The answer is yes. And he tackles everything. He tackles everything. Sorry? But he means this literally. He means it literally. Yes. So that's not good for, relations between modern Jews and rabbis to read this sage, and we would disagree so vehemently. Yeah. I would. Yeah, at least. I mean, yeah. he definitely, the laws that he wrote, he definitely wrote literally, and he did that because of texts like the Talmud, where you might read it and say, is that really what they meant, or is that a story that happened, right? And he felt like he needed to sort of codify what was happening in those earlier rabbinic texts. It's a strong statement, but we're going to see it more. I mean, we're going to see, you'll see later about sort of taking certain things in Hanukkah taking precedence over another thing. Has anybody heard this before? No. Take it there? No. Okay, great. Okay, so we're not really particularly that interested in this text, but that's okay. Anyway, the point of it is, right, this sort of taking it very seriously. And I think that message is quite important in this time, because I think, when we get to this season, Hanukkah is put up against a lot of other major holidays in the world, right? I was talking about this on Friday night at Kabbalat Shabbat, where in Israel, Hanukkah is like, it's everywhere, right? You really sort of feel the energy and the ruach and the spirit of Hanukkah and what it's supposed to be. And in America, you don't feel it as much. And so you ask if you take it literally, but my thought in this text is just to say that, especially if you're in a place where maybe others don't know about the mitzvah or don't know about the holiday, that you should take it as seriously as other holidays. So I don't know, I thought it was kind of an interesting place to start. Clearly we're not so into it. That's okay. We'll keep going. And feel free to jump in. Yeah, Ellen.
Do you think his riff on it might be something like, if you acknowledge these miracles, then even if you give up your food and your clothing, it's kind of indicative that there are going to be more miracles to come, that you'll have more, you'll get food and clothing to replace those because of the miracle of
Okay.
being alive in this community. I don't ascribe to this, but
Like one miracle leads to another, kind of, right? So we're here celebrating the holiday of miracles. And if you give up the shirt on your back, don't worry, God will take care. It's a little bit of a, like you said, it's a little bit of a scary, a little bit of an extremist view. I see Sandy unmuting. Did you want to respond?
No, but I wanted to say that Maimonides was a physician, so he was very much in the real world. It wasn't like he was coming at this from, as the rabbis studying all the time. The other thing is he was in Egypt, and I don't know what was going on around him, but I think the Jews were the predominant religious group.
That's right. There's definitely, and we see this in the Talmud too, there's definitely worry or, making sure that we do our rituals in sort of in a serious way so that we don't assimilate. But there's also, you'll see in some of the texts, worry about being too sort of open about it, right? Like if we'll see later when we put our menorah outside, but if it's an unsafe time to do so, or if you're worried about anti-Semitism or things like this, you actually should bring it in. Ellen, I like the interpretation, and I think it's a beautiful drash. And like you said, I'm not sure that so many would ascribe to it because it's a little bit worrisome to put your belief. But I appreciate that you brought it forward. So here's our first text from Shabbat. Interestingly, this is kind of the why. I suppose this is one of the only whys that we get. Sorry, I see someone's in the waiting room. And actually, the text starts about 3 or 4 paragraphs before this one. And actually, the paragraph ends with the question, my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah, or why Hanukkah? Here, I sort of repositioned it to the top because of just where I wanted to put the text on the source sheet. But interestingly, we talk a whole lot about Hanukkah before we actually get to the question, what is Hanukkah? So here we go. What is Hanukkah? Our rabbis taught on the 25th of Kislev, begins the holiday of Hanukkah, which are 8 on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden. So this is one thing that maybe you've heard before. Those of you who have lost loved ones during this time might know, I hear a visitor coming, might know that during Hanukkah and also Purim, we don't give eulogies actually at funerals. So yes, hello, goodbye. Okay, this can't be long. Come say goodbye. Come say hi and bye. Hi and bye. Bye.
Bye, Riva.
You're good, okay?
Hi, beautiful.
I even don't know how seriously we take that, to be honest. Like, I've been at funerals during Hanukkah, and the rabbi says, during Hanukkah, we're not supposed to give a eulogy, but I'm just going to say a few words, right? So we kind of get around it. There's always the way to get around it, but there's this idea that we're supposed to be like in joy, right? And that we're not supposed to give a eulogy. So that's the first thing. For when the Seleucids entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein, and when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they made search and found only 1 cruse of oil, which lay the seal for the high priest, but which contained sufficient for 1 day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was wrought therein, and they lit the lamp therewith for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed a festival with recital of Hallel and Thanksgiving. So here we have the sort of explanation of what we're doing. And in our modern eye, we read this as, okay, they had enough oil, they thought, to last 1. It lasted 8, and therefore we light candles for 8 nights. But this text doesn't say anything about candles, right? It doesn't say anything. It just says the following year, the way that we celebrated this was by appointing it as a festival with the recitation of Hallel, which we know we do a full Hallel, which even we don't do on certain days of Pesach, Passover, and Rosh Chodesh, but we do a full Hallel during these days.
and Hoda'ah, and we give a lot of thanksgiving. There's a paragraph in the Amidah, Al Hanisim, that sort of retells the story and talks about how we praise God for these miracles. So here is sort of the Talmudic answer to, quote, why Hanukkah. We sort of get it there, but we don't really get so much about the ritual. Questions? Iren.
I'm wondering also, like in Genesis, when the world was built, wasn't light the first thing that appears?
Darkness and light, sure. Day and night, yeah.
So what I was thinking is that the importance of Hanukkah to the point that you should borrow to get the oil makes me think that at a time when people in darkness may feel the lowest, it gives them something to do to lift them up.
Great, definitely, yes. Definitely there is a focus on this holiday in light. And yeah, I think that we can give a lot of explanation for why light is important, especially right now in the sort of darks of winter, right? That when we light the candles. But we're going to even have that conversation later between Hillel and Shammai, which is, are we increasing in light or are we decreasing in light? So we'll get there as well. I won't give that one too much away because that's tomorrow night's lesson with Marilyn. Any other thoughts on this one, on this Shabbat text? Okay. So here's another part of this section of the Talmud, and one that I really like a lot, and one where we get the Hillel and Shammai argument. So it says, Tana Rabbanan, mitzvah Chanukah ner ish ubeitos. So the rabbis taught that the mitzvah of Hanukkah is one candle per household. Okay, so every night you would light one candle. That's it. For the mehadrin, which mehadrin can have sort of, I don't know if you've seen in kashrut, if you're looking for the most kosher, the most extreme in terms of hechshers, it's called mehadrin dairy or mehadrin, whatever. It's kind of the most observant, if you will. Now, here the commentators also translate it as beautifiers, interestingly. So you kind of have you have this statement of the mitzvah of Hanukkah, the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is to light one candle per household. And then they say, and then the people who do it a little bit more than that would say one candle per person, okay? And then the Mahadrin of the Mahadrin, like the most religious essentially, say, no, it's not just one candle every night, not just one candle per person in the household, but actually you have to increase or decrease your light in some way. And then the rabbis of the Talmud, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, they disagree on which way to do it. And this is where we get that famous argument about lighting up or lighting down. So for Beit Shammai, he says on the first day, light 8, and then afterwards you decrease. So you start with 8, and then every night you take 1 away. And Beit Hillel says on the first day, light 1, and then increase. Now we know that we go nowadays with Beit Hillel. Some people go with Beit Shammai. I saw on Facebook the other day, a rabbi light the candles, and he wished everyone, I was confused because I thought he was on the 8th. I thought it was like a video from another year. He started to light the menorah with the shechianu when he lit all night 8 lights. And I thought, what's going on here? And then I, realized I guess some people do actually take this argument seriously. And some people actually light from 8 to 1. We know at least one person in our community who does that. You'll find out more about that tomorrow if you join us for Hanukkah. But essentially, interestingly, I think it's interesting to note that what we do today is considered the Mahadrin of the Mahadrin, right? It's considered like the most sort of stringent view in the Talmud, because we don't often take the most stringent view. I mean, we don't necessarily take the most lenient, right? But we sometimes fall somewhere in between, or it's not always consistent. And here we're like, okay, we have this base mitzvah, then we have the next level, and then we have the most extreme, and that's where we landed. Sandy? No? Oh, yeah.
No, nope, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
I heard on the radio something interesting, and that was, how come is it the shamas, the one that we use to light the others?
Yeah.
How come it gets no special
No love.
recognition?
Well, it's just the helper. And it's interesting, like that there's nothing on that in the, it listed a little bit in the Shulhan Araf, but there's very little on what that shamus is supposed to do. Though the only thing that you do know is that you're not supposed to use the candles of the 8 for any sort of benefit. And because of that, we know that we can't light one candle with another. So like last night we had 3 hanukiah out, and one of the ones from one of them didn't light proper, like it sort of lit and then it went out. And then, your instinct is to take the one from next to it and light the other one, but you have to take the shema. You're not supposed to sort of light the lights with each other, essentially. You're supposed to have a shamash doing that work because it's the extra candle. Anyway, I always, I think we see this a lot. We've learned this text a bunch of times about sort of the Hillel Shammai argument. And interestingly, that one is the most, both of them in some ways are the most strict, the most stringent of the arguments that we get in the Talmud. I don't know Ellen.
I just was going to share this tradition I do with my family. I have always taught the children, I give them a gold coin for each night of Hanukkah, and I give them an extra coin for the shamus. And I explain to them that the shamus is a helper. If you didn't have the helper, you couldn't light any of the other candles. So the tzedakah for the shamus is to be used for tzedakah.
Isn't that lovely? Yeah, I love that. So it's sort of tackling Iren's question, which is the shamash gets no love, right? And we kind of give it a little bit of an extra, some extra love. That's great.
And it's a little bit like what's happening with COVID now. All the helpers are so important in.
That's right. Well, there's a text in the Talmud that says we can't lift ourselves. A prisoner cannot lift him or herself out of prison, on one's own, essentially, that we always sort of need help in lifting ourselves up. And I think the same can be said about joy, right? It takes other people to sort of lift you up in joy. And maybe the shamash is viewed as that way. Okay, another Shabbat, another text in this section. It's the next section explaining why Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, what are they talking about? Rabbi Bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said there were 2 elders in Sidon. One of them acted in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai, and one of them acted in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. Each provided his reasons for his actions. One gave the reason for his actions. The number of lights corresponds to the bulls of the festival. If you're interested, you'll go and read Parshat Pinchas. There is a conversation. There's a piece about. Essentially, it has to do with sacrifice and the number of bulls going down. Really random, right, in this section. The reason that he decreases in his light is because of these sacrifices and the decrease in the sacrifice in the animals. And the other one gave the reason for his actions, that the number of lights is based on the principle that one elevates to a higher level in matters of sanctity and one does not downgrade. We know that as a halachic principle, that we are always supposed to elevate in matters of sanctifying something. We're supposed to always be striving to go upward as opposed to going downward. And obviously that is the answer that's stuck, and what mostly is the sort of the reason why we light the way that we do today. Is there a comment? I mean, it's you'll have to wait till tomorrow to hear a real scholar of Beit Shammai of the way that one lights their hanukiah, because it's hard to I find it hard to argue with that, right? That you would that the reason that we light up is to always wanting to be sort of increasing in joy and increasing in holiness. It's hard to imagine that there would be, something as compelling as that to sort of take it away, other than the state of the world, which I think is a lot of what Marilyn talks about. Todd, are you raising your hand? No, you're okay. No worries. Iren.
And it's like in aging, we go from lots of attribute to less and less up to death. So It's a bit, the Shammai makes me think more of, like you said, the natural living process.
Interesting. Yeah. And can be sort of just a fact of life, I guess. Yeah, perhaps. I guess though, in a holiday where you're supposed to be, where Persume Nisa, which we're going to see, which is the sort of the publicizing of the mitzvah of Hanukkah, the putting it out into the world and giving joy and giving light. It feels counterintuitive to light and take it away. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't reasons. I'm sure that there are very compelling reasons for people who have stuck with that tradition. But for me, the sort of increase in light resonates the most, in that I think that that's what the holiday is about bringing more light each night. And even that one candle, right? To go back to the Shabbat text that we just talked about, to have one candle every night also would feel very strange. Even though I understand it, right? Sort of marking each of the nights that the oil lasted, that you would only have one feels, I don't know, a bit sort of sad or not complete. Sandy.
I'm not sure if this was said, but as the oil had to be decreasing in the temple during the 8 days.
That's right.
Right. And if we have the holiday before the solstice, the light is getting shorter also each day. But does it really matter as long as we find meaning? Yeah,
that's right. So that's great. So we had this small amount of oil that got less and less every night. That's great. Yeah, that's another reason that I don't think I've seen. So it's a great one. All right, let's keep going. So now we're going to get into the Shulhan Araf. The Shulhan Araf is very practical. Somebody asked before, Sandy, I think you said, did he mean what he said? The Shulhan Araf is going to give us really mostly how we practice today, and it's going to give us some real halacha. One needs to be very diligent in kindling the Hanukkah lights. Even a poor man living off of charity must lend or sell his clothes to buy oil candle with. So here it is again. Okay, let's see how many years later, about 300 or 400 years later, we have this in another codified text. I know that it's somewhat bothersome, but interestingly sort of starts at the very beginning. Again, I think to really highlight the importance, to really highlight as I think the opening text used, the preciousness of the holiday, in that we really should take it seriously and do everything that we can to get a small amount of oil to be able to kindle the lights. How many lights should one kindle? On the first night, he kindles one light. From there on, he continues to add each light. So here we see that the Hillel Shammai argument has been codified in the Shulhan Araf. He continues on to add each one until the last night there are 8. And even if the household members are many, they should not kindle more. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because we probably heard, and we're about to see it, right? And the Ramah he was living in the same time, and he comes in as a commentator sometimes to help understand or to flesh out some of the arguments. So here, Yosef Karo, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he was in Sfat. He said that there should be one hanukiah, and every single night you should add a candle. And the Ramah, a commentator, comes in and says, and some say that every one of the household members kindles. Maimonides says this, and such is the widespread custom, and they should take care to each place their lights in a unique place so that it will be apparent how many lights they are kindling. So that's where the tradition of everybody in the household having their own hanukiah, maybe some of you grew up with that, maybe some of you do that now, that every member of the household has his or her own, and is sort of responsible for lighting the hanukiah on his or her own. And so that's where that came from. If one filled a bowl, so now we have to get creative with our hanukiot. I don't know if anybody has one near them. We did a really interesting lesson last year about sort of kosher menorahs, kosher hanukiot, and what makes it kosher. I have 2 to show you here today. One, if one filled a bowl with oil and surrounded it with wicks, if he covered it with a vessel, each wick counts as one light. So essentially you're creating each individual lights. If he did not cover it with a vessel, it does not count as one light because it is like a bonfire. I love this language of thinking about sort of a big flame coming together, or a bunch of little lights coming together as one, as opposed to what we're used to seeing, which is each individual one. And the Ramah gives us a little bit more. He says, therefore, One should be careful to place the lights in a straight row and not in a circle, since that is like a bonfire. Now I'm going to show you the bonfire menorah, this lovely piece of art that came home from the preschool. Okay, this is a wooden something, or like a piece of a tree, and you've seen these, right? The menorahs with the nuts on them. And when these candles are lit, if you were to look at it from this angle, you would just see one big flame up here, right? You wouldn't see every individual light. Unfortunately, the Beth Sholom preschool sent home a non-kosher menorah. It's okay. We won't tell the rabbis. And the more traditional that you might be used to is something that looks like this, right? Where it's actually sort of divided. And then there's things that are in between. I'm sure some of you have sort of artistic hanukiah in your home or something like that, where it's maybe a bit curved. There's conversation about, can it be curved like this? And the answer is essentially, just like we, are lighting up or are lighting down, that every single light sort of has its own importance, and that you have to really be stringent about separating them. So if you have, they don't want it to look like a bonfire. Okay. And now we're going to get into this conversation about where you put your hanukiah. One should place the Hanukkah light at the entrance, which adjoins the public domain on the outside. Okay, so the ideal thing to do is to put it right outside of your doorstep if you can. If the house opens to the public domain, one should put one should place it at the entrance. So I would imagine, which we're going to see in the next text, if you live in a place that has, say, a courtyard or something like that, that you wouldn't necessarily put it outside of your own door, but you'd put it outside even further. You'd put it outside the courtyard door. Here we go. If there's a courtyard in front of the house, he should place it at the entrance of the courtyard. If he lives in the upper floor, so if you're, I don't know, in an apartment building or something like that, actually, it's interesting, in San Francisco, a lot of us have to go up a big flight of steps before you get to your front door. Sometimes it feels like you've gone up a flight or two. If he lives in the upper floor, having no entrance leading to the public domain, which is not exactly the case here, he should place it at the window that adjoins the public domain. And in a time of danger, when one is not allowed to perform mitzvot, it is enough that he place it on the table. Okay, so you kind of have the ideal, right? If you can be on a, I don't know, first story house, you can put it right outside of your door. If you're in a courtyard, you put it outside of the courtyard. If you're up a little bit, you can put it on your window because you want it to be facing the street. You want it to be facing where people to be able to see. And then always there's this line that comes in at the end to say, but it doesn't say pikuach nefesh, but we'll interpret it as such. You don't ever want to do a mitzvah that's going to put you in harm's way, which some of you on this call might say that it's contradictory to what we started with, right? We actually started with sell your garment, sell your food, do everything that you can to have this oil. And once you get the oil, don't put yourself in harm's way in order to be able to light it in a safe way. Iren.
It almost brings us into the safety of doing it in Israel versus doing it in a diaspora.
That's right. That's exactly right. And if you spend time in Israel over Hanukkah, you'd walk around and you'd see that almost everywhere the Hanukiot are outside or in somebody's window. And I have to be honest, I didn't walk around this year in San Francisco, but I imagine that it's far and few between, right, to walk down the streets and see Hanukiot outside. I think there in different cities, there are Jewish neighborhoods where you might see it more prevalent, in some neighborhoods than in others, certainly in New York. The Sufganiyot and the sort of the way that Hanukkah is celebrated is different. But that's right. So you're supposed to sort of take into account the neighborhood that you live in and weigh and make sure that you feel safe about putting your Hanukkah outside before you actually do that. Okay, and then this is a question about the height. So this is kind of interesting. So a handbreadth is the width of your hand. One should place the Hanukkah light above 3 handbreadths from the ground. So I was trying to recall what these. Yes, Todd.
I'm saying, isn't that the minimum height of a sukkah?
That's exactly right. So they're the same. The sukkah is the same measurements. I think it says that somewhere in a different text. But what I was going to say is that when I was thinking about this, the walking in the streets of Israel, they have those boxes, right, where they put them outside, and don't they go on the? I mean, they go on the ground, Right. So this is kind of interesting. They're below, I suppose, what is actually the minimum. It is a mitzvah. So if you say 3 hand breaths, it's like 1, 2, 3, essentially like this. It's a mitzvah to place it beneath 10. So if you're supposed to go somewhere between 3 and 10 in terms of the height, but if he placed it above 10, he still fulfilled his obligation. But if he places it above 20 cubits, he has not fulfilled his obligation. So that's a little bit contrary to, well, I don't know, how much is it? I mean, how high is that, a cubit? Is that still like a story or two? Todd, give us a cubit.
No, a cubit's closer to like a yard.
A yard. Okay, but 20 yards is 20 yards is taller than a house. Probably like a 3-story. Yeah. Iren.
So the one on Union Square is no good.
Where is it?
There used to be one. I don't know if there's one this
What is
year.
it, like on the top of a building or something?
No, but it was on Union Square, but it was way up on a pole, or I don't remember how it was.
Okay, because
Yeah.
it's very large.
Yeah. Right. The Mishnah, the Shulhan Araf and the Mishnah and the Talmud don't talk about the size of your hanukiah, but I suppose if you put it up really, really high, but it's really big enough for people to see it, that makes it okay, Sandy's saying. So yeah, it's supposed to be somewhere between 3 and 10, which, it's kind of an interesting measurement again, because that's like, I guess you could put it outside on a table, perhaps, or something like that. The idea is that a passerby should be able to see it without having to sort of look around. Yeah, Sandy.
Well,
Can you just say, oh, sorry.
That's okay. Sandy Goldstein.
Can you just say this about the sukkah? I never heard that before. Is it that the base of the wall all the way around has to be off the ground?
Not off the ground, just that high. So you could have a sukkah. Go ahead, Todd.
I was saying the height of the wall has to be at least, let's say, 3 feet or so.
Yeah. So
but
this.
I don't understand.
Go ahead.
But you said it's the same amount in hand's breadths as the menorah. As the hanukiah?
Yeah.
Did I get that wrong?
No. You're exactly right. And it's a strange thing to picture, because what you're picturing of a sukkah is that the walls are full walls that go all the way around. And that's not actually the halakha. Like, it doesn't have to be. They're essentially saying, if you have just this much material, this can be considered a wall of your sukkah. It can It can be very small. It can start from the ground and go up to about here. And actually, that was important this year in COVID. I don't know if anybody saw, but a lot of people only put up the minimum amount of wall so that they had airflow coming through their sukkah, so that it wasn't full draped walls all the way around. You can also get away with it with certain amounts of rope. But the point that Todd was making is that the measurements are the same of the sukkah. Sandy Edwards, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to make an aside that Chabad, Rabbi Langer is lighting the hanukiah at Union Square online.
Oh.
So if you want to join him.
Yeah, and has anybody ever seen, I don't know if it happens in this city, has anybody ever seen the Chabad cars that go around and there's a hanukiah on the roof of the car? Yeah, so maybe you've seen that. And halachically, I wouldn't challenge Chabad's halacha. Halachically, I would say that was probably okay, right? Below 20 cubits, maybe above 10, but not so. Anyway, so that's kind of an interesting one also. So now we're just going to see it. Yeah, Iren.
Does it address arrogance?
Arrogance? How so?
If it's too big?
Oh. No, I don't think there's a conversation about the size of the lamp. Ernie, it's hard to see you, but I saw your hand, I think.
Yeah,
There's
a whole history about why Billy Graham and Chabad started lighting the Hanukkah in a public space, because the Christians had this very prominent cross on Mount Davidson, and it became actually a legal case because of the law of separation of church and state. And the way they got around it was by making the site where that cross was not public space, but private space belonging to, I think, some church or other. That's how they got around it. But the reaction was that the Jews felt that, you know, there was all this emphasis at Christmas about the Christian view of that this was a Christian country, and the reaction was that we have to do something to show that it's not just a Christian country, and that was the historical stimulus to having this in public. And
like public lightings in a square, do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of cities do it. So Sandy, he's going to do it at Union Square, but people won't gather, essentially. He's going to go himself and put it on. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
And I thought part of the reason it's in Union Square is because there's also a Christmas tree there that they light. They have a very public lighting of the Christmas tree, which they didn't do this year either.
Ah, okay. Okay. So this next text in the Mishnah Torah is very similar to the one before, but adds sort of just a left and a right category, which I just wanted to read briefly. It's a mitzvah to place the Hanukkah lamp on the outside of one's house, which we know within the handbreadth closest to the edge of the entrance, so that the mezuzah would be to the right and the hanukiah would be to the left. And if one was living in an attic or a second story apartment, he would place it at the window, right? Essentially, you want to put it at the front so that the public can see. One who has placed the hanukiah above 20 cubits has not done anything because it's not recognizable, right? Unless it's at Union Square and it's giant. So essentially just talking about the left and the right.
I don't understand, Amanda. Why do we have to put it so that other people see it?
Oh, so that's the main mitzvah of Hanukkah is called Pirsumei Nisa. It's called publicizing the mitzvah. And the whole mitzvah of Hanukkah is not necessarily to light the candles or to have sufganiyot or joy or etc. The idea is to publicize it and to let people know that it's happening. And so all this conversation is essentially around that mitzvah, is teaching us how to put the mitzvah or the miracle out into the world. Okay, let's see. This is similar, right? Putting this out into the public domain. So this is a commentary on the Kitzur Shulhan Araf, like I said, was written in 1860-ish. So it's pretty modern. And it's essentially a summarized version of the Shulhan Araf, which came around 300 years prior to that, and is sort of follows the same structure of the Shulhan Araf, but has much less detail in it. So here we have, it is a mitzvah to light the menorah in the doorway that opens to the street. We've seen this in order to publicize the miracle, Pirsumei Nisa. I'll highlight it for you so you can see it in Hebrew, right here. And it was done in this manner in the times of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Now, since we live among non-Jews, we light the menorah in the house. So this is kind of this is a different take. And if you have a window facing the street, you should light it there. If not, you should light it near the door. It is a mitzvah to place the menorah within a tefach. So a tefach is this much. It's from like thumb to pinky, essentially. It's similar to this. Sorry, I lost my spot. It is a mitzvah within a tefach of the left side of the door so that the mezuzah will be on the right. If for whatever reason there is no mezuzah, the Hanukkah menorah should be placed on the right side of the door. And the Hanukkah lights on the left, and in doing so, you should find yourself surrounded by mitzvot. It is preferable to place the menorah within the open space of the door. So when you picture yourself walking through your doorway, you now have a mitzvah on the right and you have a mitzvah on the left. You have the mezuzah on the right, which I think is a really beautiful way of thinking about it, that you have your mezuzah on the right and your hanukiah on the left. This obviously raises a little bit of a question. It says right off the bat that we live in a society where there are non-Jews, and therefore you don't even have to attempt to put it outside. I think I would say that's the prominent custom now. I'm not sure necessarily if it's the prominent custom because we live in a society amongst non-Jews, more so to say it's not super convenient to put your mezuzah out, to put your hanukiah outside. I think in this, we would have had a really big problem 2 nights ago if we had put our hanukiah outside, right, in San Francisco. It was a downpour. So there are some sort of practical reasons why, but it's, it's interesting to think that 300 years after the Shulchan Aruch, this commentator came around and said, things have changed and you shouldn't even worry about putting it outside at all. Pirsume Nisa, sure, put it in the window, put it somewhere else, but but don't worry about having to put it as public as putting it right outside of your door. Okay, we'll keep moving. Okay, this is pretty much the same one. I want to get in about time. So Sandy, did you have a question?
Well, no, I just wanted, I assume everyone here remembers in Montana, in Billings, Montana in the early 90s, a child had their hanukiah in the window, and that somebody threw a brick through the window. It was an anti-Semitic attack. And all of the residents of Billings, or a lot of them, put hanukiahs in their window, and, to support this family.
Solidarity. Yeah.
And it's a very famous story, and Facing History and ourselves and various groups use it as an example of, but a lot of people put their hanukiahs in the window. This talks a lot about doors, but
yeah.
The window facing.
Well, it's interesting. It talks about windows like sort of as secondary, it says like, ideally it's in the doorway. But I don't know. I actually think that in some ways, if you were, I guess it depends on your doorway. Maybe I'm thinking about it too literally, but I actually think that the window would hold a more prominent spot than your door, like, because it would be higher, like it would be more kind of like eye level, or I don't know. Now, there was like the whole movement at the beginning of the pandemic, where people were putting things in their windows so that when people would walk by, it would bring them joy. You maybe saw some of that. And there was that artist who did the honey bears, and and they're sort of everywhere. And I think, I think that when you walk, even with Christmas lights and things like that are sort of up high for people to see. If you put it on the ground, it might not be as prominent. So yeah, thank you for bringing that. Iren.
Beautiful that at the end, we are using something very natural, like light, and Christians are using something very natural, like a tree, to celebrate God, but at the same time, it can bring pleasure to everyone. So the idea that we should be all able to present our own religious sign out would be quite beautiful, and not to be afraid to hold back.
Yeah, and our tradition also teaches us that in this particular holiday, that there are ideals, and then there are other ways to do it if the ideal doesn't work in whatever community that you're living in, or if you feel like the ideal doesn't work, right? You shouldn't be afraid to sort of have the Jewish tradition and to be able to celebrate in the way that feels right to you. And so our tradition gives you these options. If you can't do it here, you put it here. If you can't do it here, you put it here. And if you think about it, between 3 hand breadths, right, between this much space and 20 cubits, that's a lot, right? So you have a lot of room to sort of interpret what works for you wherever you place the menorah. So these 2 texts are about time. It's a mitzvah from sunset until the traffic in the marketplace ceases. I saw a commentator say, well, what do you do in a place in New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco where the marketplaces never cease, right? It's a city that's going all the time. And it says here in the Mishnah Torah, one may not light Hanukkah candles before the sun sets, but rather light with its setting, not after and not before. If one forgot or intentionally did not light with the setting of the sun, he can light until the pedestrians leave the marketplace. And how long is that time? About a half an hour. If the time passes, he may not light, and he needs to put enough oil in the candle so that it can continue to be lit until the pedestrians leave the marketplace. If he lit it and it became extinguished, he is not required to light it another time. If it stayed lit until after the pedestrians leave the marketplace, he can extinguish it or take it away if he wants. Does this remind you of anything, this Mishnah? it reminds me of the first Mishnah that we studied in Brachot, which is about the Shema. When should he say the Shema? Well, if he's out at a pub and he gets home too late and he needs to figure it out, right? It's quite a lenient opinion. It's essentially saying that you do have a sort of limited amount of time, right? You can see the progression of the text. First it says, you light it when the sun is setting, not after and not before. That's a very precise time, obviously. But then it says if he forgot, or even if he intentionally didn't do it. So now you've totally canceled out the first argument, the first ideal. He can light it until he has a little bit more time. And then if this time passes, and then at the very end, it says, you don't want to leave a lit hanukiah inside of the marketplace. If you need to go, you should take it with you, and you should blow it out and take it with you. Again, I think that these texts were written in a way that they were meant to be taken seriously. But when you actually apply them now, when you apply them to your own ritual observance, I think the idea of this Mishnah Torah, of this text, is urgency. Right? You should come home from your day of work in the winter. The sun sets earlier. You should come home and you should think about lighting the hanukiah and where that fits into your schedule. It should be sort of this idea that that's the primary thing that you're thinking about right now. Are there any questions about the sort of timing that we're talking about, Sandy?
I mentioned this to my kids a couple of nights ago, and they said, well, what, the shuk was open in the dark? You know, I mean, there wasn't enough light. They would have closed it.
Right.
What, was the shuk open at night? I mean, this is what they were asking.
I mean, I think it's kind of like the last of the business, right? You can picture on Shabbat, like where the shuk is open to the very last second, before you see people running in and grabbing their last bit of things. But yes, I would imagine that you're right, that it was not a well-lit marketplace. And that's why the question, sort of the modern question is, well, that could be, 9 or 10 o'clock at night these days, the marketplaces could be open. So what are you supposed to do with that? I think what you're supposed to do with it is interpret it as you will, which is this sort of like keeping in mind the sense of urgency, and doing it as close to sunset as you can. When over Shabbat, we had, you light the hanukiah right before the Shabbat candles, and then for Havdalah, you do the Havdalah followed directly by the hanukiah. So kind of like as close to those moments of sunset as you can. I think we'll do this one, and then, one more second. Okay. And then we'll skip to the end because we're getting close to the end of the hour. So Mishnah Bava Kama. So this is our one Mishnah. Okay. Welcome to Monday Morning Mishnah. This is our one Mishnah of the day. There are, like I said, there are a few, and I dropped that source sheet in the chat. There are, I think, 8 or 9 where Hanukkah is mentioned, but they're just not that interesting. So I didn't bring them here, but this is kind of an interesting one. So here's our Mishnah. Geit sheyatsa mitachat hapatish vehizik chayav. Strange Hebrew. If a spark went out from under the hammer and caused damage, he, the person who caused that to happen, is liable. If a camel laden with flax passed by the public domain and its load of flax entered into a shop and caught fire from the owner's candle and lit a large house on fire, the owner of the camel is liable. So camels were used as, you can imagine that they're carrying different materials. And so a camel might be, I don't know, this wide, but with all the stuff on its back, it might be much, much wider. And so you can imagine a camel trying to get through the streets, through the small streets. And if there was a candle there or something like that, and it caught the materials on fire, the owner of the camel is liable. You should have been watching your camel more closely. Okay. But if the shopkeeper left his candle outside, the shopkeeper is liable. So as a shopkeeper, you have to realize that you shouldn't leave your candles burning outside because there are animals walking the streets that are carrying things on their backs, and you want to be careful. But Rabbi Yehuda says, if it was a Hanukkah light, he's exempt. So if the lights that were outside of the shop, this is like, you're nodding your head, like this is a very Mishnah, this is written like the Mishnah, right? You have these sort of strange examples, though if you picture them, they actually could seem quite real. You can picture a small city or a small town, and there's these little alleyways and streets. You can probably picture in Israel and Jerusalem, the alleys that go in and out of the streets. You're supposed to have your hanukiah out. And so if the camel causes damage somehow because of the Hanukkah light, it's not his fault. The shopkeepers said, Rabbi Yehuda says it's not his fault. And he was supposed to be putting his hanukiah outside, and therefore he is exempt from the damages. Just kind of interesting. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that, but kind of a reinforcement of putting your hanukiah outside. And that even if, so there's kind of this, there's this conflict between which we've seen kind of taken care of in other Mishnayot, right? So another text where you're supposed to put your hanukiah outside, but if you feel it's unsafe or if you feel that it's not a good idea, you should put it inside and put it in the window. And here the Mishnah is saying, actually, no, people are supposed to put their hanukiah outside, and everybody else around them has to be very careful, because we should know that the hanukiah are outside. And so you have to just watch where you walk and watch where your camel walks. All right, and I want to end with, we studied this one. I gave a drash on this over the week on Shabbat about the taking precedence and the oils taking precedence over Kiddush. And I wanted to end with this text, which I also use at Havdalah, but for those of you who weren't there, I think it's a lovely way to end. Rabbi David Hartman, who founded the Hartman Institute, who sort of spent his life bringing Judaism into the diaspora and to the diaspora into Israel, and teaching about that. He said, in considering the miracle of the cruse of oil, our sages asked why the holiday of Hanukkah was celebrated for 8 days rather than 7 days. Since there was, by all accounts, sufficient oil for 1 day, only 7 of the 8 days of burning may be designated as miraculous days, though several ingenious explanations were offered. What strikes me as being the miraculous feature of the initial day was the community's willingness to light the lamp in spite of the fact that its anticipated period of burning was short-lived. The miracle of the first day was expressed in the community's willingness to light a small cruse of oil without reasonable assurance that their efforts would be sufficient to complete the rededication of the temple. Hanukkah therefore celebrates the miracle expressed by those who lit the lamp, and not only the miracle of the lamp's continued burning for 8 days. Which I think is really just a lovely way to think about the holiday, and to think about miracles, really, and that what is the true miracle of Hanukkah? We could spend another class looking at texts and debating what the answer to that question is. What is the true miracle? And here David Hartman is saying, Rabbi David Hartman is saying the miracle is that they looked at this small bit of oil that they assumed, they thought they knew wasn't going to last, and yet they lit it anyway, and they sort of prayed that it would. And that is that he's saying is the real miracle of Hanukkah. Yes, Iren. Iren, were you trying to unmute? Hold on, we can't hear you. Uh-oh, technical issues. Okay, that's okay. If you can get it if you can undo it,
I'm here.
Oh, there you go.
Now, I just can't remember what I was going to say.
Oh. Okay, well, if you think you'll let us know.
I'm so sorry.
No problem. I want to wish everybody a Hanukkah.
I remember now. It's old age. It makes me think what Rabbi Hartman said. It's almost Dayenu. It's the equivalent of a Pesach Dayenu.
Yeah, that a little bit of oil would have been enough, but we got 8 days. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I want to wish everybody a Hanukkah Sameach, a happy Hanukkah, the last 4 nights. Thanks for going through some of these texts with me this